Trading in public places bylaw.
That's the one.
Is that you?
I get all the best jobs, don't I? Sarah's just loading the slides for us now.
Oh, yeah.
So this is what AI gave me when I asked it for a cover image for trading in public places in Central Otago. So I think it thinks it's still the 1800s. But
Yeah, some of that.
that's the voting we're all in right now, apparently.
That's how many ton on it. 50.
Move to the next one. This is what we're covering today. We're covering our assumptions that are sitting behind the work, mobile trading sites, market sites, alfresco dining and store displays on public spaces, and how to treat roaming businesses. I'll just jump straight into the first bit, which is the assumptions. So the assumption that is underpinning my current direction, which is just to say that this is the direction setting workshop, so you can disagree, but the assumption we have is that a crowd draws a crowd, that foot traffic, people and things in public add vibrancy to the area. They deliver offerings that are not otherwise available, and the current direction that we're taking is quite an enabling approach to mobile trading in markets. We don't cover it in this workshop today, but also things like community fundraising, busking, as long as you don't have an amplifier. It's all fairly enabling. And we've really tried to balance out fairness and competition as much as we can. So the first area there are these mobile trading sites. What we're really talking about here are food trucks and coffee carts that stay in a temporary location, but for a period of time, like an hour or two during an event. They're different to roaming that we'll talk about at the end of the workshop, which can be the same trucks, but they don't stop for more than 10 or 15 minutes to service a crowd. So this is really when a food truck pulls up to the side of the road and hangs around there. And what we're proposing to do is have a list of sites that have been pre-approved by roading and by parks. We can check in with any other landowners. For you guys in particular, it looks like we'd need to talk to DOC for a site or two. And then if somebody wants to set up somewhere else, we would investigate that separately, so that would cost more, but anything we've pre-investigated in the site, we can set a lower fee for. And the only site that I've managed to find so far is the Charlemont Street strip. It does run all the way down to the toilet area, except for that very small portion of the car park that looks to be owned by Her Majesty the Queen. But that does seem to be one location in the area that could be suitable for pre-approval.
Yeah. That's a copycat.
Yes. That's the one. On the next slide, I'm just going to ask if there's any more locations that you can think of that we should investigate. I do have 3 for markets, but for this, I really struggled to find an area with a wide enough road reserve to satisfy what QP's team needed. And they didn't have a giant hill like in Naseby, or wasn't parked directly outside a competing business. One example is in Naseby, there's a really great road area outside the Black Forest Cafe. That's about the only spot that looks suitable. So if something springs to mind, it doesn't have to be now, in the next few weeks, Stu, if you could just let me know and I can.
Let's go back to that one in Naseby. Why wouldn't you put it on there anyway? Because if it did have a bit like a cavalcade, there would be more people than what the cafe could actually handle. So, well,
can I comment on that, Stu?
sure.
Previously, community boards, and I don't specifically mean this one, have not wanted to see non-rate paying activities setting up beside business in taking their business. And there had been a condition that in the bylaw that similar activity could not trade within 100 metres of a business. Now, whether you are still interested in that or not is something for you to discuss.
So if we put that in the bylaw and say went to 50 metres, really you go along the road and across and it'll be 50 metres. The point which John Grant brought up a while ago was using the park over property, people wanted to hire the curling rink, and the bylaw didn't allow them to use the buildings there. If you had a massive weekend in Naseby for the curling, for example, then you could have the coffee carts as well as what they have inside. I mean, to me, it has changed because there's a lot more of those at the show. Look at anything about Deco Festivals, a lot more of them around. And having I know by not having an area, it looks like we're thinking about them in the future. Because have a big event, whether it be a cavalcade, whether it be a massive event, the businesses will be able to work in harmony with each other. I guess only have there for a couple of hours. If you can't get a meal at the Ramfleet pub, then you could go across the road down by the Turnbull Thompson car park and get a bacon butty. So the actual businesses aren't delivering. At the moment, they might be doing fine. They're making the law now for the next 5 to 10 years.
Well, yeah, it's a 5-year bylaw. The sites will sit separately in a policy, so we can bring them back to you to review. But I have not currently worked on any sort of restraint of trade, unless it's the direction I get from a member, because the vibrancy argument there is that having an increase in offerings and having more people moving around is usually better for business in the most current literature. But if the direction I get from members is to put in those restraints of trade or those conditions, that's what I'll do.
It's the example of car lots, right? They all locate close to one another. People know that's where you go if you want to buy a car. So, do you believe it is a competitive advantage for all if they are together, or do you think it's work better?
Well, I think it's a good thing, because if you look at, say we follow the trend we're getting now in 5 years' time, you may not be able to have a pub at one, but won't be adequate. You wouldn't have one in High. You wouldn't have facilities in only one pub in Naseby. Overcow, you've got only one food facility. So, I mean, to have those things, it actually might be a might's need. You might need to have events, and I guess you look at the supportive, whether it be the shows or any other events. And then you argue Wedderburn would be a classic example down the side of the station road there. If everyone raised funds for a hall or anything like that, you could have a fair or a fete. And once you don't have them on your bylaw, you haven't got them. St Beckons will be a classic. The fete day there, the pub's still busy as busy, but there's actually all those other facilities around there. So for that sort of business, it's new business. So I reckon you should look at all our towns where you can have potential 10 coffee carts or whatever, if you never know what you have.
I think down the days would be the one too, the area up there.
I thought it was really down. So like, Naseby can have 3 places.
Yeah, well, you've got the road that is a big, but even in the car park it's down, and summer it would go off. Might encourage people further.
Well, Naseby Swimming Dam would be a classic example where you can have fish and chips or bacon buddies in a coffee shop, and that could 50% increase the use of the swimming dam.
Do all of those, and if any more come to mind, we're still going to be in the drafting process for about another 4 weeks, so just send them through. It's easy to get the sites looked at all at once and to write my list of all the other stakeholders and contact them once. So what about the stadium down there? That's about to come up on the market sites, so it's a good one. And so market sites are very, very similar. We'll identify the sites that are appropriate for pre-approval. We'll have Parks and Roading assess them. We'll reach out to any external agencies, and any other new location will be considered on a case-by-case basis with those groups and yourselves. And the first site we identified is the stadium as probably one of the biggest options. The second one there is Lions Park, with a huge caveat. So the area there that is the first slide, we go back one, that is black and yellow dashes, that is all dock land that we look after but don't own. And then if you jump to the next slide, those red areas are the areas that we directly own that are at a CODC title. So I'm confident that I can go to Parks easily on the areas in red, and on the rest of the area, Parks are happy to go to dock with me to see if we can get approval.
Yeah.
And then the third area we have is Naseby Recreation Reserve. And I've just added from your comments before, Naseby by the ice rink, which is one we had thought of, but I didn't actually pull together here. And the next slide goes a little bit back to what we were talking about with the businesses. And that is utilising public space for alfresco dining or shop displays. So there's 3 options we have explored so far. The first is to permit use as long as sufficient footpath space is maintained, basically to meet QP's roading rules. It's a 1.5 metre clearance for 2 wheelchair users to pass each other. That does rule out a lot of public spaces, but we can just say to businesses, go for it. If you leave that area that's legally required, we don't mind what you do with the rest. If it becomes offensive or we ask you to remove it, you must, otherwise it's fine. We could ban it entirely. Or there is also the QLDC model that we looked into, but aren't favouring unless members ask us to, of mapping out the space that you could use and charging a cost per metre for the use of it.
Don't always agree with QLDC
And
or any of their thinking in most of the cases.
that's the one. I want you to all be aware of the reason that we explored that and also why we didn't, just to make sure it makes sense. So the argument for it, or what we were hearing, is some of the mobile traders felt it was unfair that they are being charged to temporarily use a space when others are using it for free all the time permanently. And we felt that if we're taking a more permissive approach to mobile trading as a whole, it's fair to also take a permissive approach there. So I'm sure there will be some people on either side of unfairness, but that's sort of where we've tried to balance things. Cool. The next one is...
So under that policy, the Dancy's Pass Hotel would come in there, wouldn't it?
Don't throw me under that bus, please, Stu.
Sorry.
You're good. Roaming ice cream bans. So we thought we might separate out two kinds of roaming to sort of help with that enabling approach and meet some of that offering. This is the very old traditional model you've all seen of Mr. Whippy turning up. And rather than putting specific sites for a roaming trader, we thought we'd either let them go anywhere, or because they are having that extra range, we can exempt them from the business resource areas in the townships. So that if they're in those areas, they need permission and a trading permit. If they're outside of that, it's a much more simple roaming approach. I seem to be getting nods from Stu, so that's great.
Like an ice cream too.
Yeah. And on the next slide, we thought, what if we take that ice cream model that really often serves children and we think about the other need we seem to have, and that seems to be industrial areas needing coffee. So we thought another option we could do here is to put coffee carts or some similar types of businesses also onto a roaming license. Again, we've got a couple of options. We could exclude them from business resource areas, which seems to be the gauge I've got from board so far. We could specify that they're free to roam in industrial areas where the demand is, but keep them out of anywhere else, or we could just let them go anywhere freely.
Well, I don't usually go to too many coffee carts. I've been a young councillor many times in a coffee cart at St. Bethan's, and it was actually really cool because it was one of those things. Whatever, I mean, because you never know where it is on a and do things. So I was thinking, give people opportunity. And to be fair, if you had a moral compass, if someone did have a coffee shop, the last thing you really want to think they would do it. But once you start regulating that out, I'm let everyone go where they want. Free.
Sounds good. Which I assume answers my final question for you of the day here is, if that coffee cart were to also sell food, would it change your thinking, or would that also be
No.
Just checking, does everybody else agree with council thinking?
Free range coffee.
I mean, I feel like they are probably going to be moved on relatively quickly if they take to parking outside one of your local cafes in Maniototo.
Yeah.
And that might sort of stuff.
We don't need to make rules of that. Then.
Thank you. My final.
Well, I guess if that became an issue, then that's when we come in with the stick. If it's not an issue, we don't need to create the issue.
And you can also come in and ask me to change these conditions. A bylaw is more laborious than a policy, but it really is. We can do it relatively quickly. Is there anything else you'd like me to consider while I finish the draft of this one, or are you just happy to see it in its final form and give me feedback on it? Thank you so much.
Thank you.
But when you look at those other ones for areas, it would probably pay to, I'm only thinking lots of Lauder and those places. So anywhere where the rail trail car parks or the rail trail integrates with the state highway, because, you know, you could have a duathlon start up in 20 years' time again, or there's a marathon, half marathon running here, whether in the White Yard as a fundraiser or just an event. And so really where your rail trail car parks / station yards were will be also a logical place where people get off the road on a council road that's got a big, large area. So maybe all of those areas should be looked at from Clyde to Hyde.
We would need this for one.
We're pre-approving as many sites as we can to reduce the admin cost later. If a new site comes up, we'll just approve it at the time. But unfortunately, whoever first comes up with it will have to pay some of that administrative.
And what would that amount cost to be?
I don't know what it will be yet because it will be entirely dependent on if you tell me an enabling approach versus a cost generating or revenue generating approach. And so I'll go away and find that out and bring that back to you.
To me, every town has to have probably an area like that if they wanted to have a fete. And if they did decide there was going to be the school cross country and, you know, they started at Omakau and they bike and trip and then end up in Lauder. So if we enable a lot and they don't get used, we've lost nothing. But if we try to pick one up and make it work, it might be outside the big hall. You know, there could be a movie made there, and so it's the cost of the rate bar. So I guess it's one of those, if you circle 15 areas and only ever use 6, we might be right. No, Louise.
This is only trading in public places by law. There's also the district plan that permits temporary activities. So you can invite some Blossom Festival and all of those sort of temporary events or sport and cultural or something. Yeah, so all of those AMP shows, yeah, they just fall under the district plan and are permitted in as long as they aren't inconsistent. So if you're on a reserve with the Reserve Act, which obviously allows for recreation, you're fine. So you don't need to actually, through this process, identify them.
There you go. It's easier than me going to plans. Thank you.
So it's got my 5 and 10 year hat on today, see, visionary.
Yeah, I'm enjoying this. Good luck. Thank you.
First and first, we've got election protocols. I feel a bit remiss. I should have done some AI generated images of elected members.
Somebody big members around here.
So I just wanted to give you a quick run through of what's happening. It's obviously very much on people's minds, especially students. But we have got the local government elections coming up. So we're mindful of the pre-election period that starts on the 11th of July and runs through to 11th of October, which is election day. So just a quick reminder of the time frame here. So we've got nominations open on the 4th of July and they close on the 1st of August to get your nominations in there. We are having a candidate briefing evening, which will be held in Alexandra, which has happened before, just to encourage people to stand, and there'll be a little bit of introduction into what it means to be an elected member in that session. We're just confirming venue for that one. So then election day on the 11th, voting opens on September, 9th September, and then finishes in October. With the progress results, which will be available in the afternoon. And I think Saskia and a few others will be phoning around those who have been successful in that process. And then should there be a close run thing, the final results will not be announced until the 16th of October. I think in the past we've been able to achieve phoning around everyone who's been successful.
And for those of you that do study it again, we look to make those phone calls really fast as soon as the next bit of time so that everybody around the hours. So Carrie will obviously probably do the council ones, and then we'll provide a conference report so that you find it as soon as we know.
So once again, we've contracted the elections out to Elections NZ, and so they are responsible for running the elections with assistance from us here and the governance team. And Peter Kelly has a responsibility, obviously, facilitating and fostering substantial elector participation. And Paula Penn will be working with us doing some comms as well. through that process. The election promotion that we're doing to encourage people to stand and to vote, we're going to have candidate videos to assist voters. So they were run in town elections last year, and they were really successful. So anyone who stands has the option to go in and be part of a candidate video. So it'll be individual videos. I think they're usually about 90 seconds. We'll give you questions in advance, and then you'll have an opportunity to probably a couple of takes just to kind of get your message across in a really engaging way. So that'll be cool to do that and roll it out. And we're also going to have orange voting bins around the district. So we did use those for the by-election in Cromwell, but they're going to be all around the district. So we're going to have them in all supermarkets and libraries and service centres. So just to make voting really easy for everyone. The pre-election report will be out soonish. We're working on that just now. We're working with the Electoral Commission to encourage enrolment. There will be a digital comms campaign out shortly, as part of which I'm going to send out a quick questionnaire for all elected members, just asking you a few short questions, just to have some sound bites that we can run alongside encouraging people to
Is one of them going to be, is it fun?
We might get a little bit more creative.
So much fun.
Can you use it?
So much fun. We won't know what to do with fun.
And then once again, we'll be liaising with external groups like Rotary and Lions who have run candidate evenings events before. We can't run them ourselves, but we'll certainly help facilitate those events to encourage engagement as well.
We have to.
Well, I think it's nice to do. I think it encourages. I think it's fulfilling Peter's responsibility to encourage voting.
But then, like, I'm only going back on the candidate. Look, it's a pretty tasking thing to put yourself in that role when you really want to be involved in governance. And the amount of consultation we've done in the long-term plan and the district plan, you don't know what a council's doing by now, because you could have someone out there who might be standing for the right reasons that may not be able to handle the pressure publicly up against an old elected member. And you really could ruin them forever if they felt that they didn't comfortable in that role, because you will get someone, Chuck Teviot, Chuck form a business group or something at a young elected member saying, well, you promised to do this and you haven't. You know, at the end of the day, if the groups are really supportive in the community, and take Bex, I mean, she's in the community all the time, but she probably may not want to go to Alexandria and stand up in front of a group on the community board in the town hall.
That's a fair point. I mean, I think they have encouraged engagement before. I know at the by-election they were really well attended when the standing.
I just think there's been a lot of issues in our communities over the last 3 years that have definitely made it, just by the turnout on our long-term plan, that they do know what council is. And by putting the elected members through the hoop, it's enough tasking role as it is for them to justify a decision made about Cromwell Hall, which is out of our role. Just
it's an interesting point. And
if you're going to do the video and everyone gets a fair crack, and this is what your person is, especially community boards. Council's a bit different, I suppose, because it's a bigger piece. But a community board, if you wanted a 20-year-old school leaver or varsity student to stand, they may be totally powerful in the board table, but not powerful on the, and you're probably just going to skew it. That's my theory.
Yeah. And maybe the candidate videos will kind of fill that
do
out too.
Because
It's a slightly kind of fairer platform perhaps for them all to be.
You know, you've only got to have a Stu Millis or someone have a go at you about a specific thing that you don't understand yet because you're not in council.
Yeah.
Lisa.
Give that some consideration, given perhaps the environment has changed a little bit.
Yeah,
Just a few minor changes since 2022, mainly around Maori Walpoles, which doesn't apply for us. Nomination and voting period slightly changed to allow for the changes in postal services, just with more and more infrequent postal collections and pickups and things. And then just looking at what will be on the voting paper, given the changes that you will be aware of from the representation review last year. So currently now looking at 10 councillors, with consistent representation from Vincent and Cromwell, and the same representation from Maniototo and Teviot, one person around the council table. And similarly for community boards, so all community boards will have 5 members, So that's obviously a significant change for Vincent and Cromwell. But each board will have one member appointed from council and 4 other representatives. And then just rolling onto some protocols. So just really being mindful of the differences in the election period for incumbent elected members, and just recognising that you've got a huge amount of BAU to do in the rest of the training, and how that might be affected with you also undertaking some electioneering and working towards the 11th of October. So just elected members seeking re-election must balance between being an elected member and candidate. Council will not promote the re-election of current elected members. What is BAU and what is campaigning? And that's going to be a particularly interesting conversation in an LTP year. There's already significant and large issues that are going to come across the table in that period. So just how we manage that is going to be very interesting, but we'll work through that. Elected members will have access to the information they need for the current roles, obviously, and changes. They cannot use council resources for re-election purposes. So that's just something to be mindful of. Things like photographs that might be taken by using council resources, and branding, colours, photos, using council buildings for election, things like that. And elected members may not be photographed, quoted in any media release, any standard media slots paid for by council in that 3-month period for elections. Again, no campaigning in council chambers, or in the same premises as an orange ballot bin. So that's kind of another consideration, which is supermarkets now. So that scope becomes a bit wider. So just to be mindful of. I'm not sure that we can really.
Everybody gets a T-shirt that says "Don't talk to me about council." Or
Market shopping not using council photos for campaigning. Council staff will not assist with electioneering activities, so I guess just be mindful of what you're requesting after booking events or cards for election activities. Using your own email address for campaigning, so only even going so far as to use, if you get an email regarding your election, to your council email address, which I imagine would happen. It's very common. The guidance is that you should be responding from your own private email address, things like that. So, and voting papers are not to be collected from electors or their assistants. We have assistants. And then social media, and I guess it's probably where the landscape's changed more significantly since 2022 with wider use of social media pages, and a lot of the councillors and their representatives having their own social media pages. So just being sure that social media channels cannot be used for electioneering by candidates or members of the public. These will be watched. Any post, positive or negative, made by an individual specifically relating to their own or someone else's nomination, and the intention to run for council or election campaign will be removed. Council social media channels will remain neutral, so comms are onto that. That obviously we're still promoting the election and the process around it, and the fact that we want to encourage voting turnout, but not associating with candidates. And council social media channels will unlike and unfollow all the candidates in that re-election period. And then just mindful of what happens on your own social media channels, about not posting on council pages, no comments or replies on council pages, no mentions of tags, so all the tags we use, hashtag tagging, and then yes, you can take a council post and send it to your own audience, obviously, so that's probably the best way to engage if you are a big social media. That's about it, but just really interesting things to mindful of through the pre-election period. And
I'm thinking about all the links to council, not many people like council, so it could be a disadvantage to you.
Well, that's one way to do it. And I have put the slide presentation in SharePoint, so if you want to go back to it, or if you've got any questions.
Steve. Yeah. That's it.
And that's it, okay? Yeah,
Okay. Well done.
way ahead of time.
So, we had the other day at council about that lady, I thought it was pretty cool. Rebecca had, we got that?
I've got video, yeah.
I've also got an answer about some broom.
Cool, don't get into them.
And so they've been on up at Tyree payroll this week. They got to finish Swindon and Back Road next week, and then continuing to Naseby and further area. We've just done our unsealed inspections for programming for next year, and we know we got Ranfurly Back Road, Bypass Road, Plenty Road, Mundale Road, St Bathans Loop Road, with some Walden Pines there as well, Driveway Road, Penny Road, and then Willows on Conga. So if there's anything I haven't mentioned that you know of, put me a text.